Hello and welcome to World Talks with me, Ashim Kumar. Ukraine is escalating its efforts to disrupt Russian maritime logistics, targeting fuel supplies, shadow fleet vessels and transport routes in the Black Sea region. These operations are forcing Moscow to redirect elite units and air defences away from the front lines. Joining us is Nedelcu. He's a partner and senior director of Geopolitics at Rasmussen Global. Mr. Nedelcu, welcome to TVP World and thanks for taking the time.
Thank you.
So tell me, how would you assess the Ukrainian strategy of attacking oil and gas infrastructure, shadow fleet ships and so on? How effective is it being?
Well, we have to remember it's coming at a time when Russia is also ramping up its air attacks on Ukraine. And that is because this is Russia's only card it has in order to force the Ukrainians to essentially surrender, which is the Russian aim. So Ukraine's attacks aimed to kind of flip that on its head and at least try to create a situation where, for example, right before winter, when Russian attacks are expected to continue and affect Ukraine's energy grid, be able to come to the Russians and perhaps force a sectoral ceasefire. So that's the context in which we have to look at the Ukrainian counterstrikes.
Yeah, but I mean, it does put Putin in quite a bind, doesn't it? I mean, because, you know, with all the bluster that he and his cronies have been using since the war began, for him to say, yeah, okay, I give up now because you're attacking my energy resources, let's negotiate. I mean, it's unlikely that he was going to do that, isn't he?
Unlikely at least until September 20th, an important day for him. And of course, unlikely in general, but definitely before this date, because this is when Russia has Duma elections. Now, of course, these elections are generally managed, rigged, if you will. The result shouldn't be an expectation. However, Putin cannot appear to even look like he's losing ground. He needs to show that he can, generate a landslide. Therefore, even more so before the September 20th elections, when essentially all the 450 seats in the Duma are up for re-election, he needs to ramp up his attacks, and this is what you're seeing. That's what's generated as in the last few weeks and days, and probably for the months to come.
Right. Now, yes, I mean, I can see that he's going to have to raise his attack levels, but he's also having to defend more, which means spreading out his air defences and other units away from the front line to protect deep targets inside Russia. How is that likely, if at all, to impact the front line for Ukraine?
It's not about impacting the front line, because on the front line, what you see is a very slow movement one way or another. In some areas, the Ukrainians perhaps are gaining some ground. In some areas, the Russians are gaining some ground. So on the front line itself, we should not expect major movements, major changes. The big front actually right now is this air attack. So both sides, as you can see, since interceptors are an issue for both and actually worldwide, both sides are trying to harm the other more, if you will, to be able to affect the other's energy grid as much as possible. So therefore, he's doing it to the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians are obviously counter-striking back wherever they can.
Right. Now, in terms of Russia's economics, it's no longer getting its fuel out by sea. Its choices are now limited. I mean, China is obviously going to buy as much as it can at reduced prices. But how much of an impact is that going to make on Russia's ability to wage war?
It's making an impact already. And we do know that Russia's sovereign fund is nearly running out. So definitely Russia's in a bind. But to be honest, so is Ukraine. So this is really, if you will, a war where each side is trying to be able to change this calculus, make sure that it can outsurvive the other, so that when there is a negotiation in the talks, they can be negotiating from a position of strength. It is very difficult to say how many years one side or the other has. Russia is, of course, a very opaque country, so difficult to assess what's happening inside. But definitely there are signals, and we can see signals, including from the oligarchs, that the pain is being felt.
Right, but what about strategically speaking? I mean, the impact that Ukraine is having on Crimea. Essentially, it's cut off oil and energy supplies generally to Crimea. People aren't able to get through. Military equipment is restricted. They're having a pretty tough time. I mean, that's a strategic loss, or potential strategic loss to Russia, isn't it? Must be quite embarrassing for Putin.
Embarrassing, definitely. Strategically, of course, important. However, the most important thing for Putin, and we have to always remember, Russia can withstand pain in the way that democracies can't, by virtue of being an authoritarian state. So the biggest pain, actually, where the Ukrainians can inflict is on Moscow, that in St. Petersburg. These are the constituencies that Putin really cares about. So the more we'll see, strikes on the energy grid affecting Moscow, St. Petersburg, then we can expect, that pressure to increase on Putin. I will say one thing. Unfortunately, what this does is it only pushes Putin to increase his attacks, because, like I said at the beginning, his only card is ballistics. That's the only offensive weapon he has, where Ukrainians, and actually most of the world, including the big powers, US included, do not have, and they have a shortage of interceptors. That is the only thing he can do.
Right. Now, you mentioned the impact on Moscow and St. Petersburg of these attacks. But really, I mean, how much power, authority, influence, if you like, do the people who are impacted have on Putin's policy?
Again, they don't. Russia is an authoritarian state. So the regular voter has limited power. But we have to remember, Putin is increasingly coming under a lot of pressure. And like I said before, elections are coming, even though these elections cannot be expected to be free or fair, or even resembling that. But the image he needs to portray, because he does feel cornered, of course, is that he's in control, and that he can win by a landslide. Even the smallest degree of opposition, discontent, or lower, for example, election results on September 20th, that will not look well for Putin. He's pressured to keep up that front, so therefore he cannot afford any weakness, at least until then.
Right, very briefly, if you would, please, Mr. Nedelcu. His oligarchs, we know that he controls them very tightly, but how influential could they be in Putin's future?
Depends on, this is a very good question, one asked quite a lot, and you'll have, different assessments of this. One that they're not very influential at all, one that they are critical. Always, of course, this happens when their bottom line is affected, which it is, and when they are collectively able to put pressure on him. We cannot exclude a situation where, the situation gets quite dire for them, where they would do that. But it is right now extremely difficult and hypothetical to assume that the oligarchs can change Putin's policies.
So no changes for the moment, at least. Mr. Harry Nedelcu, thank you very much for sharing your analysis with our audience, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of this episode of World Talks. Don't go away, lots more coming up. Goodbye.